Hello, and welcome to ConTinual, the never-ending convention. Tonight's topic is romantic suspense, and here to discuss that are three wonderful writers in that genre, Jeanne Adams, Nancy Northcott, and Patricia Sargeant. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Henry.
First up, most everybody by now should know who you are. But just in case there's one or two people who don't, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, starting with Patricia.
Hi, I'm Patricia Sargeant. I write romantic suspense and contemporary romance as Patricia Sargeant and Regina Hart, and I write mysteries as Olivia Matthews.
Great, thank you. Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write romantic suspense, paranormal romantic suspense, which is its own kind of thing, science fiction mysteries with Jeanne Adams over there, and historical fantasy and romantic spy adventure.
Cool. Jeanne?
I write romantic suspense, paranormal romantic suspense, urban fantasy, space adventures with Nancy.
With a bit of a suspense element.
Yes, indeed, and enjoy all of it. So.
Okay, first up, I think we basically need to talk about what is romantic suspense, because, hey, when I started reading, romantic suspense consisted of a mystery that had a romance, and there was one name, and, well, there were a couple names, but the big one was Barbara Michael's Elizabeth Peters. I know that the genre has evolved since then. So could you all give me your read on what is exactly romantic suspense? I'll start with you, Jeanne, and then go Patricia and Nancy.
Well, to me, and if you look at the Romance Writers of America definition of it, it's a book that has 50% of the plot is romance and 50% of the plot is suspense. Sometimes that goes 70-30, but it's almost always heavier towards the romance. But the suspense element is really heavy, and it's integral to the plot of getting them to their happily ever after.
Patricia?
I'm going to tap a little bit on what Jeanne said, because if you have a romance with suspense, but you can take the romance out of the story and it does not affect the story, then you don't have a romantic suspense. You have a suspense with romantic elements. So to Jeannie's point, I've heard it's more like 60-40 romance to suspense, 70-30 romance to suspense, but the romance has to be integral. There has to be a reason for these two people to be involved in resolving the suspense.
Okay, you couldn't take the suspense out either, presumably, but
correct. You're right. Yes.
So it's integral as well. Nancy, thoughts?
Well, I agree with what both of them has said. I think given the wide range of latitude with the balance between romance and suspense, it's possible to dial back the suspense significantly below 50%, like so it's 30% or so. Much more than it's possible to dial back the romance, like Patricia was saying, because if you can take the romance out and the romantic situation doesn't help drive the plot, then it's not really romantic suspense. It's just, as Patricia said, suspense with romantic elements. And I'm sure we've all been on convention panels where readers have cited books like the Elizabeth Peters or books in other genres that have strong romantic elements in them. And they say, oh, it's such a romance. Well, no, it's not. Even a scene where people have hot sex in the middle of the book does not make the book a romance. It has to be a thread that runs all the way through the book, or it's not romantic suspense. And I think there's a lot of confusion in general about romance and other genres mixing. I think there are a lot of people who feel like if there's any romantic thread in any kind of a book, well, it's romance. And not so really. So romantic suspense has to balance the two. And I think of the two, romance has to be equal or stronger for me.
What I'm hearing is that basically romance is the noun, suspense is the adjective or the modifier of the romance. Because, you know, you're saying 50% or greater romance, and it has to function as a romance before it can function as a suspense novel. But the suspense is also crucial. What attracted you to this rather, it would seem to me very challenging to have both the romance be so strong and still have a valid or strong suspenseful element. You know, the two would seem to be contradictory to each other. What attracted you to this challenge? Nancy?
I like books where stuff blows up. I also like books where there's a romance. And so add to that my deep enjoyment of watching bad guys get what's coming to them. And romantic suspense gives you all those things. And so it is a challenge to write it sometimes because I tend to get a little carried away with the boom, with the explosions at times. But, you know, I have critique partners who go, remember the romantic part? I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I go back and fix it. Because it's not that I don't care about it, but honestly, for me, it's easier to write a chase scene and a fight scene than it is to write the emotional arc, because you have to hit the notes just right, or an emotional arc is not going to work. And so I like that combination of romance, explosions, and bad guys get what's coming to them.
Cool. Jeanne, I know you like the booms as well. What attracted you to the genre?
Part of the reason Nancy and I get along so well. Ooh, things blow up. Yay. But I grew up on, you know, Robert Ludlum and Elizabeth Peters, and I started reading that when I, you know, pulling those out of the library and stuff like that. And I guess my parents thought that because they weren't romances, they probably didn't have anything objectionable in them. But so I really like that, but I also found that I loved romance, and I could never seem to write anything, even when I started writing, that didn't have a body on the floor and romance. So I guess part of it is just that's the way my mind works. It's like, ooh, who can we kill? My husband says it's why I have such a cheery personality. I get all that out on the page.
And when you sharpen your knives.
Yeah, exactly.
She does sharpen her knives. It's scary. Anyway, Patricia, what attracted you to this genre? I like these two who I know. You seem like a nice person.
Oh, thank you.
Well, actually, for me, it was a very natural calling for the romantic suspense, because to me, love is the strongest possible motivator. Mm-hmm. And I like putting ordinary people in extraordinary situations. So what is going to motivate you to find that hero inside but love? And when you're faced with a dangerous situation, what's going to keep you going? The desire to keep the person you care about safe. Mm-hmm. So that's what attracted me.
Okay, so that's what attracted you. So you were reading it before you started writing it, presumably. Mm-hmm. What, you know, you mentioned ordinary people in the context of this, but I understand there are different types. Well, you all mentioned paranormal romantic suspense. You know, military guys show up. I know from Jeannie's books that security personnel, law enforcement personnel show up. And I know that you have spies, Nancy, and yes, I do read your books, so I do know these things. But this way she may not sue me, you know. Anyway, but seriously, Patricia, what could you talk a bit about the different types and the different types that are in your work? Ordinary people in extraordinary situations, also, what else, paranormal? What other kinds of romantic suspense? And could you talk a little bit about them?
Well, I appreciate the question. I like to focus on not just, but on everyday people. In one of my romantic suspense, I had movie producers and a science fiction author. And in another one, it was a firefighter, an arson investigator, and a newspaper reporter. I like to put people who aren't used to facing danger in a dangerous situation and have them take that next level, have them take those risks that they aren't really made for to see what happens. But I do enjoy reading some of the like the SEAL Team 6 type romantic suspense, because then you get these tough people, men and women, who find a softer side when they fall in love. I like that too, but I like to read that and write the ordinary people.
Yeah, sort of like going and reading something that is not what you're writing to, it's sometimes healthier not to read what you write. Exactly. It can be. A change is as good as a vacation. Nancy, your suspense sort of branches in a lot of different directions. Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, my first sale was paranormal romantic suspense. It was about mages fighting ghouls and demons in South Georgia near the Okefenokee Swamp. But some of the mages were the equivalent of mage cops, because it's a secret society. And before anybody says Harry Potter, no, it was not inspired by Harry Potter. It was inspired by the Justice League of America, because Bruce Wayne could be having a latte at the next table and you would never know he was Batman. So it's that kind of thing. But you have to walk a fine line with that, because people who read more conventional romantic suspense, like the stories that I have in the Canham Castle books, which feature secret agents, a lot of those people do not like woo-woo. Mm-hmm. And so they don't want magic with their suspense. Some people like it, but you can't assume that the Venn diagrams of spies and wizards are going to be a circle, because odds are they're not. And I like writing both kinds, because, to me, mages and wizards are kind of the fantasy equivalent of superheroes. So I like those. And then usually romantic suspense, I think we would all agree the traditional format is one couple, one book. In the next book, another couple steps to the fore. The Lethal Web series, which is the bright pink book over my shoulder, that is different. That is, I call that romantic spy adventure, because it's the same couple through the whole series. And if I call it romantic suspense, then people who read the first book and then pick up the second book are going to go, why am I still reading about these people? Whereas if you call it something else, they go, oh, okay, it's the same people. And then they roll with it, because it's part of it's a branding issue. And so I like to read books like Patricia's talking about. I read a lot of them where it's kind of the romantic suspense equivalent of the amateur sleuth in a cozy, I think. The danger level's probably beefed up a lot. But I like those other kinds of romantic suspense. But I've always had a weakness for spies. I've always had a weakness for wizards and superheroes. So there you go. That's where it comes from.
And is there a superhero romantic suspense in your future?
Probably not. There might be some superheroes with romantic elements, just like the Canham, the Outcast Station books that Jeannie and I write together. So far, we don't have a lot of romantic elements, but at some point, being us, we probably will. But I don't think they would be books that you could slap the romance label on, because that wouldn't fit with the series branding.
Right.
So yeah, I'd love to write superheroes, but I have other pots on my stove at the moment that have to be tended to.
I think we all have a lot of writing pots on the coming to a boil. Yeah.
And see, I kind of fall in the middle between what Patricia writes and what Nancy writes, because I have the whole Witches Walk series, which is paranormal romantic suspense. But I also like the same thing that Patricia does. I like to put the ordinary people in extraordinary situations where someone is targeting them, or, you know, there's somebody after them, or, you know, I love that scenario too. So probably my first book that I sold to New York was, it's now called Dead Run. That does have an FBI agent in it, and he's undercover. And the ones that I will eventually get to that follow on to that, they'll be FBI agents too. But the other suspense ones that are just straight suspense that I have are just kind of ordinary people. They're a lawyer and what is she? Forgotten.
Too many books.
Anyway, they're ordinary folks. But I really do like to add the paranormal elements because my brain works that way. So my stories and the Christmas at Canham Castle and Trick or Treat at Canham Castle both feature a paranormal element too. So gotta have some creatures in there. Witches and creatures.
Yeah, let's talk crossovers here. You know, is this a genre that lends itself to that particularly? Being itself a chimera, something that is put together of two different genres. Does that mean it lends itself to other cross-genre?
Well, I think you honestly can't. I mean, you can do a paranormal romance without suspense, but then it's basically a contemporary with paranormal elements. So many paranormal romances, though, have some kind of suspense element, either because people are after them because they're paranormal creatures, or, you know, they're trying not to be discovered. So there's always a little bit of a suspense element there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Patricia?
I agree with what Jeanne said, because I do believe that it does lend itself to crossing up like historical romantic suspense. Would you agree, Nancy? Because I mean that's just so it's almost like a gimme. It's yeah, that will work. That will work with the proper writer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, you can do historical romantic suspense. You can do science fiction romantic suspense. I mean, you can pretty much put that story structure on anything.
But by suspense, though, you know, one of the things that I used to encounter when I was reading heavily into romance, mystery, etc., was that a lot of stuff was categorized as romantic suspense, which struck me as simply woman in peril. I think, you know, I think that that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking women with agency who are pursuing the suspense element and the mystery, or do I have that wrong?
No,
I think that's so well put.
Yeah. I think it may have started that way, where it was sort of woman in peril, and, you know, I think a lot of things started that way with more the, you know, woman in the situation. But fortunately for all three of us as writers, we're to the point where we can write women with significant agency. Sometimes they are the ones solving and saving, and, you know, the ordinary person may be the guy, and the person who's solving and saving and doing the defending is the gal. So that can be really fun.
Well, I think it makes a difference too, whether you are traditionally publishing or you are independently publishing, because traditional publishing still seems to have a narrower focus on what they want in a genre, or at least it seems to me from what I see on the shelves. Whereas if you're publishing independently, or often with a small press is often willing to give you more leeway because they don't have a giant marketing department that ultimately calls the shots about what gets published. And so it seems to me, and I would be interested to know if Patricia and Jeanne agree with me, that from what I see on the shelves, the branding is such that if it's a romance oriented book, they want it to be shelved in the romance section. It can be historical romance, it can be paranormal romance, but they're less open to a book that's 50-50 science fiction and romance, 50-50 adventure and romance, or so it seems to me. I could be mistaken because, you know, given the current situation, I haven't been into a bookstore in a really long time.
Yeah, and
What do you
Patricia,
think,
Jeannie?
Patricia?
See, first, I would like to agree with what Nancy says. In my experience, they are less open to sharing that romance with something like science fiction or adventure. But also, they are, traditional publishers are a little wacky with their romantic suspense definition. Because I'll be honest with you, because you guys are my friends and it's just the four of us chatting. When my romantic suspense came out through traditional publishers, they put on the spine contemporary romance. Well, I had multiple dead bodies in my story, so I found that to be highly inaccurate. But it's because traditional publishers are a little
A little
And
wacky, yeah.
well, on the flip side, romance sells really well.
But you know, I know an author who I won't name because I don't want to create, you know, feelings with her and her publisher, if there are any, but her books are also labeled contemporary romance, and they are snarky and they are funny and they have action and it's law enforcement and it's got a suspense plot. Her books are, her traditionally published books are romantic suspense, but they slapped contemporary romance. I'm sure they thought it would sell better. So I don't think these things are done arbitrarily. I think there's a reason behind it. But I would bet you there are a lot of people that happens to, Patricia.
I feel better now, Nancy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're a good friend.
I think the only genre that they let the romance tag kind of fade off is they will allow romance in cozies, usually over the course of several books, and certainly not as more as a romantic element, not as a major part of the story. But they still don't want to call it romance. They still want to make sure that it's mystery stamped on the spine. And, you know, a lot of those have a little bit of a romantic thread here and there. Of course, mystery is different because mystery really is about, okay, the body's on the floor. Now let's solve the crime. Whereas our books, the suspense books, are really more about action, 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 action. And there's continuing and ongoing jeopardy. At least that's sort of the way I think about it, as opposed to the more cerebral, hey, let's figure out who done it.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, it is different from a simple mystery plot. There has to be that action element. There has to be that constant threat.
Well, and like Nancy said earlier, it can't be like some quite famous books where the male action hero actually has a sexual encounter with this person in the book, and that's kind of that. It's not part of the story. That's certainly not a romance. That's an action adventure, a thriller. But it doesn't mean they can't, you know, get some nookie. It just means that they that's not part of their arc or their growth or their thread. And you know, that's to me one of the best things about romantic suspense is that the romance drives the heroes, male or female, to, like Patricia said earlier, go further than they might have, risk things that they might not have done if their heart wasn't involved.
Oh yeah, no,
and that's what makes it fun.
not basically taking it away. I'm just trying to get a handle on the difference between a romantic mystery, say, or mystery romance, and a romantic suspense. That's what I was trying to get at. Not that the balance, you know, I wasn't trying to get it, but the fact that the suspense element is more urgent, would that be a good word?
Oh, yes, yes.
Than, say, in a traditional mystery where you have a lot of contemplation about the who and the why. as opposed to, somebody's trying to kill me right now.
Yes.
You know, so that was, yeah. It seems to me that if you're going to blow things up or you're going to have a lot of urgency, there's a certain amount of research that has to be done, and a certain, that there are challenges above and beyond just, having ordinary people in a room and talking at each other, or going and dealing with threats, which can happen from your place of business or from predatory co-workers or whatever. So what kind of research do you all do for your plots, and how challenging do you find it, or how challenging do you find it to not put the research into the books?
Well, the most important thing is, how many watch lists are you on?
You got to clear your cache. You got to clear your cache.
Yeah, you do. Browser history, delete. Well, I want to know, Patricia's put her characters in some pretty precarious positions. I want to know what the craziest research project she had to do was, because a couple of her books are, you got into some serious stuff.
And did you do any of it yourself?
Well, I do on occasion act out a scene to see how someone might fall.
Yeah.
But the other stuff hasn't really been quite that crazy. Just, looking up arsonists and their motivations and the damage they leave behind, browser history, delete, that kind of stuff. Well, if the gun comes at you from a certain distance, how much damage does it do?
Mm-hmm.
Delete.
Did you ever go to, for lack of a better term, police camp, where you go, shadow people and on their rounds, and get taught on the range how they hold the gun and that sort of thing?
I haven't done that yet. I would like to do that. I know some people who have done that. Have either of you ladies, Nancy, Jeannie, have you done that?
Did Writers Police Academy. It's huge fun.
Yeah,
Huge fun.
I would like
I
to
haven't done that, but I have a friend whose husband is ex-Air Force, and they have a friend who is a licensed federal firearms dealer. And I was down in Atlanta. Several of us were down there visiting writers, and they said, well, let's go out and shoot some stuff. And my previous experience with guns had been, my dad let me try to shoot a branch off a tree with a rifle, which I totally missed when I was 12. And so I had nothing since then. And so that was really nice, because he had the guns my characters use. And I have a friend whose husband is ex-military, I shoot her an email and say, will you ask him this? And she's like, yeah, I'll get back to you. So
yeah, Writers Police Academy is super fun. That one's super fun. But I did some of the, I don't know if you've done this, Patricia, but are you a member of Kiss of Death chapter of RWA?
I used to be, yes.
Yeah, so they do those before conference every year. They would do these pre-conference things where you could do a tour of was it in LA? It was the port. And you could do a tour of the postal service, system, and how that worked, and how the inspectors inspected, and all the things they go through, and ask all kinds of pesky writerly questions. And I take a lot of classes, teach a couple.
Dispose of bodies, yes, anyone?
Well, I spent 13 years in the funeral business, so I get to teach about the body dispose. So I did know how to do that, but like Patricia said, some of it is you research and go, yeah, that doesn't need to be in the browsing history. Pipe bombs, nope, let's get that off the browsing history. And
well, I was actually on the postal inspectors tour for Kiss of Death, and they were great. They had stations set up where they explained different kinds of things that they do, and we rotated through in groups, and they were wonderful. But I think they were a little taken aback because when they took questions, and this was about the machine that sniffs out forbidden, like, chemicals and things in the mail.
Yeah.
And that's what their whole presentation was about. And they talked to us about it for 15 minutes and they were going to take questions. And this is on the heels of the anthrax presentation that was given to the whole group, and then we broke up. So they said, well, if anybody has any questions. And this woman in the back who looked like the stereotype of somebody's grandmother raised her hand. And the inspectors, who one of them looked like he was 15 and the other one looked like he was about 30, said yes. And she said, do y'all carry guns? And they looked kind of surprised and they went, yes, ma'am. And she went, can I see it? And so one of the guys, you could tell they had not expected this, pulled up his shirt and showed her, I think it was a Sig Sauer attack, strapped under his loose polo shirt. And it was like that every session we went to. It's because I think a lot of, especially women who don't grow up around law enforcement and don't grow up in rural areas, don't have a lot of experience with firearms. And so to have the chance to ask people who use them every day a bunch of questions was just awesome. So I really wish my county had one of those, citizen police training things, because I would go do it in a heartbeat, but we don't. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. The postal inspectors were great. Despite getting a lot of questions about guns, it didn't appear they had expected.
Well, I mean, that was one of the things that was wonderful about Riders Police Academy, because they were already prepped for the fact that we were going to ask really pointed and specific questions about firearms or arson, or if you want to blow something up, if you want to blow the door off, where do you put the C4? And, in a normal, everyday presentation of that kind of thing, you get the side eye if you ask that kind of question. And fortunately, when they already know they're talking to writers, they don't kind of give you the side eye quite as much if you go, okay, now if I need to blow all these doors off, how much C4, how much poundage, how much C4 do I actually need? And do you need a blasting cap for C4? Or do you need all those things that, you actually need to know? I mean, that's one of the things that is kind of different about writing romantic suspense than really any of the other sort of subgenres is you kind of have to get it right, because people will email you and you look really dumb if you've gotten it wrong. So,
and you lose your credibility. And not only do you hurt yourself with that book, but you hurt yourself with subsequent books. That's my great fear. I don't want to lose that trust.
That can be hard. Has anybody caught you on anything? I mean, that you went, damn, I missed that? Or on the flip side, has anybody basically said you got that wrong when you know you got it right?
Oh, yeah. If you enter RWA contests very much at all, somebody is going to tell you you are wrong when you know you are right and you have chapter and verse on hand. But there's no sense arguing with somebody who does that. It doesn't get you anywhere. It's, it's kind of like punching into a big caramel. I mean, your hand sticks and then it just goes. But, oh yeah. I mean, I've had people, not so much suspense things, but historical things that people would tell me, well, that's not right. And I'd look at it and go, yes, babe, it is. And I got the books to prove it. But that doesn't get anywhere.
Trust me, Nancy does have the books to prove them. If there's a book on whatever she's writing, she's got 6 copies of it.
Very arcane books. Yes, indeed. Well, it looks like you've got quite a stack behind you, Patricia. Are those all yours, or are those your research materials?
Some are research materials, forensic science for writers and stuff like that. But a few are mine, and some are other people's.
Cool. So, what have you found to be the most useful thing to have on hand? I mean, for your books.
Delete button. Delete history.
I missed that. I'm sorry. We're all laughing.
Do you mean research books, or do you mean for the character?
For me, there's several of those books I find very critical. And
Mhm.
not just plotting books, but also forensics, history books,
Mhm.
books on government agencies, that kind of stuff.
Have you also written the historical romantic suspense?
No, but I'm hoping to one day write a historical mystery. I'm just not certain if I'm going to independently publish it or traditionally publish it.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, there's I've read a number of those things like the Lady Sherlock series that is wonderful, and the amount of research that goes into a historical mystery done right is always wonderful to behold.
I
Okay,
think there's a real market for it too. So, you know, with the advent of some of the great programs on Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that. So go for it, Patricia, because I want to read
yeah,
it.
would be wonderful to read it. Okay,
You say lovely.
we've
Thank you.
we've sort of skated the side of this, but I'm going to ask you all outright. What is the most challenging thing about writing romantic suspense, and what's the most rewarding? Start with you, Patricia.
Keeping the tension up is particularly challenging for me because to me, I can always go higher, but then is it enough for the reader? So I just have to go with how I feel about it. Keeping the tension up is hard for me.
Okay. Nancy?
Striking the right balance between the romance and the suspense is the most challenging for me, because it is easier for me to write the suspense plot. And so I have to go back in and be sure that the romance is not just there, but that it's properly layered, that the characters and the conflict are three-dimensional, that nothing is pat, that it's believable, that it would take them from chapter 1 to the end of the book to work out the romantic conflict while they're dodging bullets and ducking explosions or whatever the heck else, you know?
Jeannie?
Well, I'd say both of those things, but also for me, sometimes it's the research. You sort of referenced this a minute ago, Jean Marie, is that I sometimes get bogged down in making sure that I've got a detail right that in the end probably doesn't matter and sometimes gets cut. But I'm so paranoid that I don't do something that somebody will catch me on and go, that's not correct. But I think to Patricia's point, probably it's as much keeping that tension appropriate, you know. So.
And the most fun is blowing people up?
Well, not people necessarily, but things, yeah.
Clothing.
I saw Nancy going, yeah, and she's thinking of specific people, and she's probably plotting it right now. And I'm going to be one of them if I don't clean up my act.
Well, no, but you know, Jean Marie, I read some of those books you were talking about earlier. I mean, I went to the library a lot. I practically lived at the library in the little town where I grew up. And there were just not a lot of books other than what I now recognize were traditional young adult romances. I didn't think of them as that at the time, but looking back on it, I realized that's what they were. There were not a lot of books where women had agency really at all. And, you know, as much as I love comic books, they were pretty much the same way. I mean, even Wonder Woman was getting rescued by Steve Trevor all the time, which is like, really? I look at that now as an adult and I go, seriously? But that's just the way publishing in general was. Nancy Drew was an exception. I loved Nancy Drew because Nancy Drew got stuff done.
Yeah.
And so being able to write women who are tough and assertive, often tougher and more assertive than I am, but tough and assertive, and get things done is really satisfying. And explosions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and two, I think there's the element for us in the time period where we're at now, where we not only need to remind all of us as women that we have that agency and that we're completely capable of those things, but remind other people too that you know, don't never underestimate the women in your life.
Yeah. Okay. before we get into the essential promotional aspect of the panel, I want to ask you, if you had to recommend a friend comes to you and says, I want to read romantic suspense. I've already bought your books. I've already bought the books of everybody on this panel. Who else would you recommend? Patricia?
The first thing that pops into my, oh my gosh, there's so many. Stop it. Okay, the first name that popped into my head was Deborah Fletcher Mello. That lady can mix the romance in with the suspense really well. And I think her suspense is really smart. And also Sharon Cooper. Yes.
Could you spell the first lady's name?
Oh,
Sharon?
Sure. Deborah, Deborah, the longer version.
Yeah.
And then Fletcher, Fletcher, and then Mello, Mello.
Okay, I wasn't sure about the Mello part. The Deborah and the Fletcher people could get, but the Mello. Nancy, do you have a recommendation?
Well, I do. I'm sitting here while Patricia was talking. I was trying to envision my romantic suspense shelf and remember exactly who was on it. For pure romantic suspense, Dee Davis has written some really good books. And if you like military romantic suspense, Catherine Mann or Cindy Gerard both do really well with those. I'm still trying to visualize the shelf. I mean, if you want a thriller with some romantic elements in it, which I know is not what this panel is about, but I read those too. Karen Rose, John Land,
AJ Howe,
and Linda Castillo is more what we were talking about, mysteries with or thriller with romantic elements. The romantic thread is not quite as strong in her books, but they also have a strong romantic thread. And I'm actually sitting in front of the thriller shelf, which of course I can't see because it's behind me, and the romantic suspense is in another room. So I was trying to think who else is on that shelf, and I'm just blanking. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was quite a list. Jeannie?
I'll add Suzanne Farrell and Laura Thwait. She writes some great thrillers, romantic thrillers.
Could you spell that one?
Loreth, Loreth, White, just the color.
Okay.
KJ Howe writes thrillers with romantic elements. Those are good. Alyssa Cole's newest romantic suspense is supposed to be brilliant. I've got it on the TBR pile, but I haven't read it yet. I really love Patricia's and Nancy's, so I'm kind of doing the Charlie Cochet, she writes male romance, and they're paranormal, but they're great suspense novels. Wow, so many. They're so good, so many good ones.
Cool. So it sounds like it.
Of course.
You can have as many as you want.
Suzanne Brockman.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
We have to add her.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. And,
You can add her. There is no clipping the list. We've got plenty of space.
Well, I'm just trying to think. I'm sort of like Nancy. I've got my list in my brain, and I'm not. It's not processing very well.
Well, I have a tablet right here, and I just retrieved it. So that's a whole different shelf. That's not, physical books, which helps me stay out of trouble because the to be read mountain of existing physical books is big, and the mountain of ebooks is invisible, which is so let me just take a second and look and see what I can come up with.
I will do that in my rolling chair too, so I can grab a.
Well, and this book is not cooperating. It's not closed. The book that I was reading is not cooperating properly. And
you know what this?
Oh, Carla Negger. She's great.
Yeah.
And
You know what this reminds me of, ladies?
What's that?
I had a friend who loved to buy clothes, and she used to travel a lot. So she ensured that her husband bought a SUV, which she used to travel in. And she would buy clothes when she was out of town and store them in the SUV, knowing her husband would never go with her travel car. And
Oh,
that's when I hear you going, I've got the tablet, they're invisible.
That's right. Beverly Jenkins.
Yes,
Oh, I'm
yes,
sorry,
yes.
go ahead, Jeannie.
Beverly Jenkins has some great suspense novels. Helen K. Diamond, I think is how her. I don't know if she writes them as Helen K. or if she writes them as something else.
Maya Banks.
Oh yeah, she's good.
Nicole Kristoff's are thrillers that kind of blend romance in with the thriller, but there's more romance in it that you would find in what you would think of as a conventional thriller. Pamela Clare.
Jane Ann Krentz, and also writing as Jane Castle for her paranormal romantic.
Yes.
Laura Griffin.
Yeah, she's good.
Suspense.
And J.A. Walker. Some of hers are really good. Mary Burton.
C.S. Harris writes historical mysteries with a very strong romantic element in them. The Sebastian's, I think it's sincere. It's like ST space CYR mysteries. C.S. Harris. Kay Hooper writes wonderful. I don't think they would technically be called romantic suspense, and I think they're sold as suspense. But they have very, very strong romantic elements. Her Bishop Special Crimes Unit books. And oh my gosh, this series, Tara Jansen, the Steel Street series is over. It's over and done with. But you know, I'm not a muscle car fan. I don't really get into that. All the guys in her series drive old muscle cars, but she makes really good use of that. And it's a secret agents under the guise of antique car salesman thing in Denver, bad boys turned government agents. And I'm kind of gushing because I'd sort of forgotten about them until I was flipping through, because the series is over. And so I haven't read one, you know, in years. But Elle Kennedy, Diana Love.
Oh yeah, Diana's are great. Now she writes, some of her suspenses they're straight suspense, and those are some of her older ones. And they're just straight romantic suspense. And then she has paranormal romantic suspense too. And gosh, who else?
Well, I think we go ahead.
Iris Bowling and Linda Howard.
Oh yeah. Oh, Linda Howard, she's really good.
Yeah.
Diana Love's suspense series was called Sly Temp, SLYE space TEMP series, and those are older. That series is done too. But I'm gonna put my iPad aside because we have things to do other than for me to just scroll through it while we all sit here
and talk about everything. But hey, talking about our favorite books is one of the great joys of life, really.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we're coming up actually on our hour. And before we go, I want all of you to tell me what books are either just released or coming out in the near future for your fans, and also where people can find you on the web. So I will start again with you, Jeannie.
You can find me on the web at jeanneadams.com. You can find me on Twitter, probably far more than I should be. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest, but more Twitter than anywhere else. Probably in romantic suspense, my newest is a re-release called Blood on the Altar. And that's those normal people in jeopardy. It's a normal people in jeopardy book. And I'll have another Witches Walk paranormal romantic suspense sometime before the end of the year.
Maybe in time for Halloween.
Yeah.
Okay.
She knows me well.
Nancy?
Well, my latest release is the story Mr. Never Again in Trick or Treat at Canham Castle. And I will be releasing singly my story from the Christmas anthology, which is called The Last Favor. And then sometime this spring, The Steel Rose, the second historical fantasy book in my trilogy for False Deaf Books, will be out. My website is nancynorthcott.com. I too am on Twitter, probably more than is good for me, and I'm at Nancy Northcott. I have a Facebook author page, which I occasionally visit, where I'm Nancy Northcott author. And that really, Twitter's the easiest way, Twitter or my website.
Okay, great. And Patricia?
My March release is Murder by Page 1, a Peach Coast Library mystery. It's a cozy mystery that I write as Olivia Matthews. It's the first one in my new series. And my website is patriciasargeant.com. I'm on Twitter sometimes at Books by Patricia. And my author Facebook page is author Patricia Sargeant.
Okay. Does Olivia Matthews have her own webpage, or can she be found at patriciasargeant.com?
Thank you for asking. Everybody's on patriciasargeant.com. Me, Regina, Olivia, we're all there.
Okay, great.
All her multiple personalities.
Writers, we make split personalities fun. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for joining us here tonight, and to thank you in the audience for joining us at ConTinual, the never-ending convention. If you like what you've seen here today, please like, share, follow, and subscribe. Thank you.